I see this trap all the time. First-time managers were previous top performers. They now don't know how to manage top performers. They want more. So businesses promote them to the manager role. That is a completely different role to the one that they've been doing. So what they do is they lean on, well, do what I did because that's what made me successful. And that's their approach to management.
I'd say those two things are definitely far apart. Everything you think the job is that and more.
They still keep their quota, but now have more responsibility.
It's spooky. It's scary.
Today's guest is someone who spent more than a decade in sales and commercial leadership roles, progressing from SDR through to leading business development teams. He blends leadership coaching, sales psychology, and real-world go-to-market experience. John Mason, did you used to be crap at sales?
Yes.
What part of your career flashed through your mind?
The start of every chapter of my career in sales, we expect people to wear many hats. A team leader cannot turn 6 people that are responsible for inbound, outbound, SDR functions, closing the business, and upsell supporting. They will just fail at all 6 rather than be good at one. Internal coaching is brilliant, but external coaching is the thing that teams need.
When you first become a manager, what kind of training and coaching did you get?
The company did invest some time, effort, and money into leadership training for those of us that were new managers. And this is a point about the industry as a whole in sales training. That to me felt like a HR tick in the box exercise. It's just a case of being able to say, we did some training.
We can just hire someone to come in for a half-day or one-day workshop that's going to eradicate all of our problems. Why do people still turn to that?
We think it's a silver bullet. This is the reason why my team is not successful. This is going to solve all my problems.
Do you think HR people should be arranging sales training sessions?
I'd say
sales leaders, coaching, we all know how important it is, but we also know finding the time to coach as often as needed is a challenge. You often have random pockets of time and you feel like, how do I coach effectively to the time that I have in my calendar? We've created a guide for you, whether you've got 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 45 minutes or an hour. In there, you go to the chapter that you need with the time that you have, and it'll teach you how to coach effectively. Link in the comments to download. So John, welcome to the show. Good to see you. How are you feeling?
good. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks.
And I can't help but notice immediately your background. That looks like, I think, are they called Funko Pops?
They are indeed.
Is that the turtles behind you or not? It's blurry. I can't see. What are they?
Oh no, it's Yoda at the top. So it's Yoda at the top. They're out of focus for the camera. So it's Yoda at the top. There's some Marvel characters in the middle in some rather jazzy colours, and hidden just here is one that my team bought me, which says the king of SME sales. So it's when I left my previous role, they got me my own custom Funko Pop.
Wow.
Which is nicely a book rest there. Look.
Yeah, very good. And I can see a little bit of a Star Wars at Walker, I believe they're called. But great to have you on the show, John. It's always interesting to see people's backgrounds and what they share. But big welcome to the podcast. We always kick off with a yes/no question. John Mason, did you used to be crap at sales?
Yes.
And when you heard me ask you that question and you answered yes, what part of your career flashed through your mind?
I'd say the start of every chapter of my career. So whether it's my first role in sales as an SDR, my first promotion, my first change of job, my first change of vertical, my first time in management, I think every time you start something new, that imposter syndrome creeps back in and you're like, I am crap at sales.
And I suppose that's an interesting differentiation though. There's the imposter syndrome, where it's that self-limiting belief and the reality. What do you think's going on when you say that? Is it the imposter syndrome and it's like your own self-limiting belief, or do you think there's a reality to that as well?
I think the reality is there for a lot shorter time than the imposter syndrome makes you feel like it's there. So there are going to be times in your career when you're going to be able to look back and think, there's one time I remember this particular call, this particular demo where I really messed up. And they are the points in which you are crap at sales, but you may have that longer lingering thought and feeling that you are.
Every salesperson I speak to has got their own story where something has gone horrendously wrong. If I ask you to think back to perhaps your worst moment where you've just made a mistake that now you can look back on and laugh, but others could maybe learn from, what is probably the biggest howler you've had in your career today?
I recall in my previous role when I was down here at Planner, I was fairly fresh in the role, probably my first 3 to 6 months on the phone. And there was a big uptake in the number of inquiries we were dealing with. There was a big sort of push, and I was doing a lot of demonstrations, a lot of conversations on autopilot quite a lot. And I fell into this sort of bad rhythm of just taking everyone through the same motions. And I remember being on a demonstration with a client, trying to convince them to upgrade to the latest thing. And at every turn, I'd say this wonderful new thing, that wonderful new thing, selling the features, the thing we shouldn't be doing. And they're just sort of very uninterested, but they're still going to buy it. And I couldn't understand what I was doing wrong. And it was that I was just selling the features. But I kind of got to the end of the call with that particular client and said, I think I've just sat here and talked at you for half an hour trying to sell you this latest thing when in fact you just want to continue and have whatever we're offering. And I, on the phone, sort of coined an analogy or a story that if you walk into a car dealership because you just want the latest hatchback, you just buy the hatchback and then you upgrade to the next hatchback and then you upgrade to the next hatchback because you're just a creature of habit and you don't really care what features there are. I've just sat there and told this person all these wonderful new things in the latest car, and he's like, I just want a car, mate. Just give me that car. Thank you. So that howler, I wouldn't say it haunts me, but I definitely look back on it and think that was a point in which I realized you can't just cookie cutter your demonstrations and conversations. You need to adapt and listen to what the client wants.
And that's interesting. Like I think a lot of salespeople will know that feeling of, I'm on a call with someone, it's not gone well, and I just need it to end now and forget about it and go on my next call. But what you've done differently there is you've kind of called it out. You've said, look, on reflection, it feels like I've just spoke to you for half an hour. That wasn't the right thing to do. I can imagine that disarms the prospect because they're not expecting you to say that. How did they respond to your brutal honesty there?
I think they responded well. I think you're right that the fact that I was able to think on the fly and turn it around and have that self-awareness probably comes from a time previously in my career where I've made a similar mistake, but wanted the ground to swallow me up and wanted to get off the call as quickly as possible. So the fact that this happened pretty much 6 years into my career, halfway into my career, I couldn't work out how old I was then, meant I would have learned a lesson previously and applied it then. But yeah, there definitely has been times where I've come off a call as quickly as possible, wanting the ground to swallow me up.
I think what's interesting there is you're talking about something that's happened 6 years into your career. And I know you'll take this the right way. Many people on paper would read that story and think, surely in the first 6 years, you've learned that lesson, not just a feature dump. But I think one of the things that I see all the time is people confuse years in role for growth and development. And it's not the same thing. So many salespeople have the same year over and over again, and they're not learning, they're not developing, they're not moving on. And it feels like perhaps you got to a point where you realized, okay, something needs to change. I need to grow and develop. And maybe that was the point where you realized that. Is that a fair statement?
I'd say it was a fair statement. It was the third vertical, the third area that I was selling into. So financial services was, not something I'd done for 6 years. I'd done selling for 6 years, but financial services was new. Some days I was doing three or four days in a row. So the thing that I slipped back into was that cookie cutter demonstration, just go through the motions, get it done. And that's when I sort of fell foul of going back to the default, which I had spent years unlearning.
And let's talk about that early period then, like the years that you'd spent learning and trying to undo that. How did you actually end up in sales in the first place?
I think I ended up in sales like everyone else ends up in sales. I fell into it by accident. I woke up one day, decided I needed a 9 to 5 that paid me a salary. I couldn't necessarily just keep working 0-hour contracts in the gig economy as such. And basically applied for took the first role that would accept me, which, back in 2012 was my local BT business office.
And what was an early John like in a sales role?
A deer in headlights, Bambi on ice. I had plenty of soft skills that I took into the role where I had worked in bars and done cross-sell, upsell. I had done some door knocking. I had done some telephone sales, appointment setting for windows and things like that in my teens and early 20s. But this was B2B sales, selling telecoms. It was like a step up and there was a steep learning curve. Deer in headlights or Bambi on ice is definitely a good way of describing how I would have been in those first 3, 6, 9 months.
And in that time, who helped you?
That's a really good question. I was quite lucky. So BT is a large organization, but the local office is franchised and so it's small. At the time, we probably had 30 or 40 staff. I know the Southwest office now has probably tripled in size since I left in 2014. You learn off your peers. So it's who's already there setting the appointments that are doing well, sort of copy them. But I did have a really good team leader, manager that was fantastic at protecting his team. If there was some negativity coming down from the top table, make more calls, book more appointments. Why are you guys not hitting target? He'd do very well at absorbing that and then playing it back to us in a constructive way for us to be able to achieve those targets. So having a really good team leader allowed me the space to grow in those 2 years.
I get the idea of absorbing the pressure from above and relaying that in a message that is softer, more motivating than it is criticizing. I totally get that. What other traits did this team leader have that perhaps has left an impression on you?
They were always fair. So there's a few mouths to feed, whether there's inbound leads and things like that. So there was always fair in making sure that everyone got a fair shot. He didn't show favoritism. And I probably couldn't quantify what it is that he did, but I can quantify what feeling I had when I was at work. And it's a case of I was ready to go back for him. I was ready to go to war. If he said we need to book 2 more appointments today, I was ready to go. So the things that he would have done that would have instilled that in me. And so obviously, this is going back 12 years, so I can't necessarily think of what they were. But I do vividly remember that feeling of, ready to bat for him or ready to go to war. And I think that's important. If your leader can make you feel like that, then that's a really important thing.
What was this leader's name?
It was Matt Charlick. So yeah, he was at BT for quite a long time. I think he's now at O2 or Virgin. I know those merged, so he's doing something over on that side of the telecoms fence, so to speak.
And let's say I said to you, "Oh, I know Matt. I'm going to give him a call." If I was to call him up and say, "Tell me about John Mason in those early years," how do you think he would describe you?
I was inconsistent, back then. I'd have good days of booking 2 or 3 appointments and then go 2 or 3 days without booking one. I just couldn't seem to find the stride. That I couldn't seem to find the thing that made it click. I remember watching Wolf of Wall Street thinking this must be the secret sauce to how you be a good appointment setter. So from a performance perspective, that's what you definitely say. But I know that I showed a lot of those skills that says if I teach this person how to achieve those things, there are other things that they can do naturally that will help them in their career move forward.
And what do you think the difference was then on days where you might set 2 or 3 appointments and then days where you wouldn't? Was it a tactical difference in those days or a mental difference in those 2 days?
Tactical. I think back then it was just sheer luck. This is 2012, 2013, 14. The days of just do 100 dials a day. There's no full enrich lem list. There's no sequences. It is just pick up. There's no parallel dialers or anything like that. It's just pick up the phone, manually type in a number and do that 100 times in a day with as little research as possible. I think that was a very shotgun scattergun approach to appointment setting and to sales development roles. And I think it was brilliant to have learned how not to do things and to have that experience to cut my teeth. But people coming into the industry now, they've got a lot more support behind them to not get to that target by chance, but to actually get there tactically.
I'm going to challenge that slightly. And I'm going to do that in a way which I think is going to be a really good conversation, John. And this comes from a place of working with and managing SDRs for a long time now. The tactical side of things, I get it. If you do something different one day to the other, that can impact results. I suppose what you were talking about there, though, it wasn't different tactics. It was pick up the phone, have 100 dials a day. I get you might say and do things differently, but your point about in today's day and age, there's like full enrich, Cognism, all of these sort of, we've never had more technology at our fingertips, but that technology wasn't different for you day to day. So I wonder, was it that you might just take your foot off the gas a little bit because you've had 2 or 3 appointments a day before, you don't feel like you need to achieve that the next day, and perhaps you are just a little bit more relaxed, you're not desperately trying hard. Do you think like mentally, because I think tactically, when people looking to improve the performance of sales team, they focus on those tactics. But I feel like most of it's actually the mental side of sales. Like obviously you need to know how to do things. You need to know how to say, what to say, the call structure, etc. But I think your answer there would tell me it was more mental than tactical because you were doing the same thing each day. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think I probably didn't actually describe it as well. I didn't know what I was doing. So it was sheer luck if I was booking appointments because there was not necessarily a huge amount of science behind it other than pick up the phone and make those dials. So now we would better define an ICP. We would create sequences. We would be more target and methodical in our approach so that we can take what works and repeat that. I didn't necessarily know what was working, so I didn't necessarily know how to repeat it. And I 100% agree with why you think the side of it would be mental. And I've seen that as well in the near decade that I've worked with SDRs and AEs, training, coaching, managing, working alongside. But I do know from a perspective when I was working at BT, you couldn't take your foot off the gas. You weren't allowed to. I definitely felt like there was a degree of ruling by like an iron fist and fear. There was no coasting. You did need to hit 2 appointments, 3 appointments a day. And if you didn't, you're in for a bit of a rollicking. So I think the mental side of it would be around that imposter syndrome creeping in. It's not going well. I'm at lunchtime. I haven't booked an appointment, and then you start the self doubt, and that will probably carry through into your call. So that mentally, I think, would be uh, where your subconscious is probably actually affecting your dials in the afternoon, for example.
So that's interesting, because that to me, if you get to lunchtime and you've not had any success, you start to count down the hours that you've got left, and you start to become more attached to the phone calls that you're making and the outcome. But again, look, could you argue that's tactical? Maybe, but again, that to me screams mindset and being able to rise above what situation you find yourself in. I've enjoyed that part of the conversation, John. When I know Beck was in conversation with you about organising this episode, you shared some really interesting thoughts, and we agreed that we'd feature. We agreed that we'd focus this episode on that first-time manager role. That this is one of the biggest challenges that the sales industry has. Right, you get top performers. They want more. So businesses promote them to the manager role. And that is a completely different role to the one that they've been doing. And there's so much we could talk about here. And this is kind of what I want to get into. But I see this trap all the time. First-time managers were previous top performers. They now don't know how to manage. So what they do is they lean on, well, do what I did because that's what made me successful. And that's their approach to management. And the company doesn't support them in that transition from quota carrier to manager. And actually, far too often, they still keep their quota, but now have more responsibility. And they've got to navigate so much, not just learning how to interview, recruit, and onboard, how to have one-to-ones, how to use the tech stack in a reporting sense, how to forecast, how to have difficult conversations. But they've also got to go from being a friend to being a boss. And it's a huge step up. And like you said in your notes when we were swapping some emails, most salespeople don't become managers by accident. We all accept that. They do choose it because they feel like it's the next step, more money, more status, career progression. And companies say yes because you're a top performer. We don't want you to leave. We'd rather promote you than bring in someone external. It looks like we're a great employer. We are developing people. But yeah, the issue that nobody talks about is the reality of the job. Talk to me about your experience. When you first started thinking about leadership, what did you think the job actually was going to be, and what was the reality?
Yeah, I'd say those two things are definitely far apart. A lot of professionals, not just sales, but sales very much so. Your top ICs tend to become your managers because of the status thing. Everything you think the job is that and more. And you probably hold things that you think are important in the role that aren't. You think they're more important than they actually are. You touched on quite a few really good points there. So you're going from, you're now managing your peers and your friends. How do you do that? How do you still build that relationship where they will, go to bat for you? How do you make them better without trying to make them 4 or 5 clones of yourself? What support do you get from the business? I remember vividly when I took over my first leadership role, it was a very much a firefighting moment. I was trying to fix the things that hadn't been done because there was, no one at the helm for a small period of time. I was trying to fix the things that needed to be done on a day-to-day basis as they were coming in. And, I was a few weeks or months away from planning for next year. So I was trying to fix the future. I thought some of those things were really important. And little did I know that many more would come, around to need urgent attention, because you step into leadership and you're managing your team, but now you have this level of exposure to the rest of the business. So there are other people in the business that now need things from you and need to do things that you weren't necessarily expecting. So I remember when I was promoted to become the team leader, the head of business development, we were going through our ISO 27001 certification. So the head of IT and ops needed some things that had been sort of left in the inbox tray. And I said, when do you need these? And he went, 2 weeks ago. So I've just been stepped into a role. I've got all these new things that I think are super important to deal with. And I've just been given a deadline of something that I didn't even know was on the radar. So it is, yeah, it's spooky. It's scary.
When you first become a manager, what kind of training and coaching did you get on how to be a great frontline manager?
I had a really mixed bag in my previous employer, Dunlap Planner, when I was made head of. I was really blessed that the previous person who was my manager allowed me exposure to her job and to do things on her behalf to kind of, I guess, tee me up, ready to take over in the event that she was to leave. I was then promoted not because I was the best individual contributor. I was, jostling for first and second continuously with another, but I was the one that could also lead people. But I did carry an individual contributor target and the team target and the responsibility of basically heading up the department with the CRO and the planning and everything else that comes between that. The company did invest some time, effort, and money into leadership training for those of us that were new managers, getting sort of consultants to come in and do workshops and things like that. To me, and this isn't, a point specifically about my previous employer. This is a point about the industry as a whole in sales training. That to me felt like a HR tick in the box exercise, as opposed to, a structured need for training, something you'd be all too familiar with my sales coach. Plenty of, people will come to you looking to training for their sales team. It's just for a tick box exercise rather than actually trying to develop that manager to an end goal as part of their career, as part of their development, etc. It's just a case of being able to say, we did some training. And I think that may have been the case. And I know that is the case for a lot of other businesses.
I think sadly the vast majority. Let's go back to that strategy of teeing you up. I'm a big fan of that. I remember when I was an SDR, I wanted to become an AE, and I got some exposure in the sense of I got to run some events where I sold tickets, then run events, and I got to learn to speak to people. And as I say, I was selling those tickets to an event in London, and that was my first taste. Then I got to, if I overachieved on my quota of booking meetings, I got to spend a day a week trying to be an AE and take those first meetings. And then as an AE, I made it my purpose in every one-to-one with my boss to say, can I take that off your plate? Can I take that off your plate? And I used to get all the crap jobs that they didn't want to do, but you do them well, and then you get more responsibility and you get more exposure. And I really believe in that strategy, not just promoting someone into a new role and it's like day one, this is all you do. I think you have to give that soft exposure and those opportunities, which seem to work really well. That sounds like that will happen to you as well, which is great. When you say about getting some tick box training and workshops, yeah, I sort of in the back of my head just thought, well, we both know. As does anybody listen to this podcast, right? No, nobody listens to this podcast will be of the opinion, well, that sounds great. Just do a workshop and training, because we're all smarter than that. We know better than that. But why do you think that people still in 2026 believe that we can just hire someone to come in for a half day or 1 day workshop and that's going to eradicate all of our problems? Why do people still turn to that?
I think it's the path of least resistance. I think it's the easiest thing to do to satisfy a question with the answer that we've done training, but the question doesn't probe deeper. So I think in companies in general that make this mistake and frequently make the mistake and don't necessarily learn from it, I think they are the ones that don't probe deeper at the SLT C-suite level when asking those questions. Why are we delivering training? What are we trying to do? What's the positive outcomes we're trying to enact? It also goes to commission plans as well. We put this commission plan together. What behaviors are we trying to get the sales reps to do? I think if we don't challenge the why, the what, the when, the where, the who, and we just accept the first answer rather binary and linearly, we will continue to make those same mistakes. And sales professionals, AEs, SDRs, leaders will continue to, I guess, be held back by their inability to evolve and to take that step forward.
The other thing that you said that just made me wince was HR booked the training effectively. Do you think HR people, as great as I'm sure they are at their jobs, should be arranging and booking sales training sessions?
No, they are great at their job and they're great as people in human resources. Just like I don't think finance and operations should be anywhere near commission plans, but in plenty of companies that is the case. I think sales leaders, so team leaders, head of business development, sales director, CRO, chief sales officer, chief commercial officer, whatever they may be, they are the people that own their domain. And I think they are the ones that should be involved in the training for their teams. And the responsibility and power should divulge down from the CRO all the way down to the team leader of an SDR team.
You've signed your team up to another e-learning course. You've hired a trainer to come in and run a workshop. But guess what? 6 months later, pipeline and performance is still lumpy. My sales coach turns learning into doing. We evaluate everyone on your team. We identify with real data the critical gaps that are holding them back, and then we remedy it. We match each person to their dream coach and provide consistent one-to-one coaching to help them fulfill their potential and hit the number. Less one-size-fits-all training, more personalized support, which results in the growth of your team. That's predictable sales execution. That's my sales coach. I think that's one of the big shifts that I've seen in the last sort of 20 years, though. I think if I go back to the first 10 years of my career, lots of companies, particularly like the FTSE 100, you can see who the CEOs are. It was a lot of salespeople with sales backgrounds. And then the 10 years that followed, it seemed to change to be more CFOs and financial people. And I think you do just run the company completely differently and have a different outset to it. Let's put something out there for anyone that's listening to this podcast that thinks the next role for them is to be a sales manager. They perhaps feel like that's in their grasp. First of all, what do you think they believe the job to be? So just imagine being that AE. I've got a sales manager role in my grasp. What do you think they believe that role to be like on a day-to-day basis?
Oh gosh, it could be so many things. Some people probably just think it's a title and some power. And they are people that shouldn't be promoted to that position. Others may just think that they're now responsible for a bigger target because they're looking after 3, 4, 5 AEs. Hopefully, plenty of them realize it's now my responsibility to make these people better at their job so that they can progress in their careers. And I am commercially incentivized. The better they do, the better I earn. The latter one's the one I hope is the one, but it's probably the middle one.
And let's talk about the realities. Let's imagine again, you're going to create the perfect advert that is a true representative of what it's like to be a sales leader. What do you think those people that have that job in their grasp need to know about the reality of the role?
Yeah. So what is the true purpose of a sales leader? You go from being all about yourself to being about others. I guess anyone watching this podcast that has children, when you're single and you don't have children, you're responsible for yourself. When you have children, you're now responsible for other human beings and you then put them first over yourself. I think sales leadership is very similar. I think you need to realize that it's no longer about you. It's about the collective team and those individuals. So anyone looking to go into leadership needs to very quickly be able to shift from that mindset about being me, and it's then about them.
I think that's a really good analogy. And as a father of two and a sales leader, that probably explains why I'm exhausted all the time. You talk about being responsible for making the team better. Let's have a really open conversation, because I think this is one of the things that sales leaders need to accept. When you think of all the things a salesperson needs to be good at in 2026, and by the way, that list has changed dramatically in the last 2 years, is it actually fair to think that a sales manager has all the domain expertise and knowledge to make their team strong across all areas and disciplines?
I will say yes in theory, but no in practice. One of the things I think we struggle with in sales as well is we expect people to wear many hats. So in lots of companies, even ones that have grown, your A's may be doing outbound. They may need to have SDR skills. They may be doing upsell as well. So they need CSM skills. So to expect without cr- like specifically defining, the manager and their role, I think they can fall foul of that target of making them better. In an organization or structure where it's a case of you are in charge of the outbound team, make them better. I think providing there is the additional support, training, coaching, mentoring for that new manager, then we do have the technology in place, the understanding of the human brain and psychology to be able to make those people better. Everyone has a limit though. I'd say it's the same with football. The level of game that's played today in football is very different to the level of game that was played 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But not everyone has the ability to become a Cristiano Ronaldo or a Messi. But everyone has the ability to become, 110, 120% better than what they were. And a lot of people say just make yourself better 1% a day at a time, and that compounds over time. So I think there's a bigger ceiling that we can reach for, but there needs to be that structure in place and that understanding that a team leader cannot turn uh, 6 people that are responsible for inbound, outbound, SDR functions, closing the business, and upsell supporting. They will just fail at all 6 rather than be good at one.
Yeah, I think the important caveat that you mentioned was if they have the right training and coaching and structure around them, which of course we know unfortunately isn't true. I had a conversation the other day. I was speaking with a sales leader. They love the idea of my sales coach. They have told me my team is not going to hit the number that we've been set this year. They are new to the role. They're like kind of green. There's a lot they need to learn and do. And they shared with me many examples across the sales process where they're struggling, like qualification, discovery, getting the right decision-making criteria, understanding how they're going to buy, budget, all of this stuff. And it'd been 4 weeks since we last spoke, which is always obviously a warning sign in general, but got on the call and they said, I've still not asked my boss if we could buy my sales coach. And I asked why. And they said, I feel like the answer is going to be, it's your job to fix this. And I understand that. It is your job to fix this, but it doesn't mean you have all the answers. So I said to the sales leader, I said, look, when you think of all the things that you ask your sales team to do, what part are you weakest at? And by the way, everyone's got a part they're weakest at. And he said, negotiation. I said, okay, so how are you going to get the team better at negotiation if that's your weakest part and you struggle with that? And then we spoke about how that's one of the problems. They're leaving money on the table. They're negotiating too early. They're discounting against themselves. I was like, that's what you need to be saying to your CEO. I don't have all the answers. I want to learn and develop. How can I do that? It's about working with someone that is stronger in that area. And that's obviously where a sales manager should be able to help in a lot of cases. They should be stronger because they've been a top performer and they've been promoted, all of that stuff. But the reality is the way in which the landscape is moving and the pace that it's moving at, I think expecting a sales leader to have all the answers is really difficult, particularly when they've not done the role before. And this is obviously kind of what you specialize in, right? It's about helping people that are now managers know what to do. And let's talk about that, right? You make the play in your LinkedIn. It's about knowing what to do on a Monday. What does that mean in real life, not on LinkedIn? Help me understand. You've got a first-time manager in front of you. What does that really mean to them?
It could be incredibly daunting to be a first-time manager. And if you're in a very reactive environment, you're firefighting, essentially making it up as you go along. You don't know what you're going to do on Monday. You don't know what you're going to do on Tuesday. You're just dealing with whatever shouts the loudest. And it's about being able to structure what you need to deal with fixing the problems that the team have, from the past and the day to day, planning for the future, developing the team and developing yourself. You spoke a moment ago about that example of a prospective client for my sales coach. That happens way too often, and hence you guys have a business. I do also think that sometimes promoting a new person into a manager position, the business thinks they're going to solve the problems. And, if a sales leader came to me and said, I'm not going to hit my number this year, I'd sort of put it back and go like, for a start, is your number actually physically attainable? Like, if I got you the best SDRs and AEs in the world with the current resources that you have, the tech, the structure, everything else, could they hit that number? Because that's also a thing that I don't think sales leaders challenge enough, is that sometimes numbers can be pulled out of thin air and they aren't unattainable. Don't get me wrong, I am not scared of a big target. I went from being an individual contributor at BT, dealing in pocket change, to being given £1 million target for myself to achieve in a year. There came the caveat: if we don't get over £500,000, it's a red mark against us keeping our franchise. X number of red marks and we lose. So, although my target was 1 million, I had to get over by 500 grand by hook or by crook. It was, inevitable. Can the best of the best do that? And if the best of us can't do it, the business needs to have an honest conversation. But then how do you get the most out of those reps? In that example that you were speaking about, he was talking about them not being able to do X, Y, and Z. Internal coaching is brilliant, but external coaching is the thing that teams need. They need both because they're not experts. I'm not a cold calling expert. That's why I'm not an SDR coach. I can do cold calling. Absolutely. I am probably, better than some, but I would always play to my strengths. And I think when you're a new leader, you need to very quickly identify those strengths, identify those weaknesses, and then ask for support on those weaknesses. Exactly as you said, going back to your boss and saying, I don't want my sales coach to do the heavy lifting of the training you expect me to do and the coaching. I want my sales coach to fix the problem the team have with negotiations. Even I could learn something about negotiations so I can then better train the next generation of leaders. But for now, I need help. It's an area I'm very passionate about. Obviously, I feel like I was a bit of an accidental manager myself. And in addition to that, I know plenty of other sales professionals that have gone on to have fantastic careers that were accidental managers. You mentioned you wanted to be an AE, you were proactive in it. I know an SDR that wanted to be an AE that became an SDR manager because the company said, oh, no. We're not going to promote you to AE. We're going to make you the leader of the SDRs. We need you to be team leader of the SDRs. Like, I don't want to manage people. And it happens far too often for reasons we've discussed so far.
One of the biggest reasons is businesses can't afford the double hit. You can't afford to take your top performing SDR and their performance out of plan, so you try and keep them in that world. Or your AE, you can't afford to take their number out of plan, but they want to be a manager, so you keep the quota and ask them to manage. But it's just unfair. I think one of the interesting things you spoke about was about how sales leaders have to also think about the future. That's really hard when every quarter you start at zero and you're always measured by your number and you live month to month. I kind of compare it to, you used the football analogy earlier. I think most football managers get less than a season or maybe a season and a half, whatever the stat might be. We all know as football fans it's a short amount of time. How are they meant to focus on the academy and the youth team and developing, which is, if you look at longevity in the role, that's what, if you take, look, arguably the very best ever, Sir Alex Ferguson, it's because he was at the helm for 27 years and he used to work on 4-year cycles, always refreshing the team every 4 years. And a big part of that was the youth academy and the pipeline and the future. As a sales leader, you can't be looking at, if you've had 3 bad quarters in a row, you can't say, yeah, but it'd be fine in 2 years because we're doing this development and coaching and I'm spending time with the team and I'm listening to calls and we're doing live training and workshops. You can't do that. And I think that's the sad reality. So sales leaders get beaten up by the system and they focus on the classics, like they obsess over pipeline and micromanagement, and they become hero managers that join calls and try to save deals or win them single-handedly, and and they avoid like those hard conversations that they need to have internally. I think the other thing that you said was interesting is about the disconnect from where the number comes from. I know you said it sort of flippantly, but your words were, it can feel like the numbers come out of thin air. The reality is, it's not come out of thin air. It's just not been shared properly with the sales leader. When you set, I don't like the word target in sales because that's something you aim for. I do think the word quota is the right word to use. I know that when I set my team's quota for the year, that has been reverse engineered against the plan that we've created. And everything centers around that plan, from hiring, spend, tech stack, budgets, recruitment, all of it. So when a manager gets given a number, if they feel like that's unachievable or that's been pulled out of thin air, that's because the plan hasn't been properly shared and there isn't that belief that they can get there, but it would be carefully worked out. Like people will spend weeks and weeks, maybe months and months putting together the plan and the quotas that go alongside it. But yeah, it feels like what we're starting to talk about here is some of the emotional burden that you can feel as a sales leader. Let's talk about that, right? You know, the pressure that you can be, the imposter syndrome, the no doubt the burnout that people feel. And what's the emotional bit of leadership that nobody warned you about before you take the job?
I guess the emotional bit of leadership is you're now invested in your team's real motivations. So if anyone says they're motivated by money, the chances are you can actually pinpoint down further why they're motivated by money, what it is about money that motivates them. They could be a family man. They want to make sure that their wife can not have to go back to work after their second child. They want to get a bigger house. You know, they're motivated by family, not by money. They just need money, which is why they're in sales. You're now responsible for other people's personal and professional aspirations. I always used to think to myself, I want to make sure the people that I lead are better professionally and personally for every year that I manage them. They have to move forward. That is a burden that if you're unable to leave your work at the door when you go home, be it virtually or in person, that can be quite a burden that could keep you up at night. That's one of the things that you're not necessarily prepared for in leadership is that you're now responsible in a way for those people and helping them achieve their goals.
I think there's a couple of interesting things to talk about there. So I'm just going to say it as I see it, and I'd love you to tell me I'm wrong, because if I'm right, it's a sad reality. I think most sales leaders don't truly understand each individual's motivation. They might understand it at a headline level. Well, they want to earn more money, or they want to buy a house, or, well, they're going to go traveling. But I think that's the best that it normally is, the headline level of the motivation. I don't think, and it's harder in a remote world, which, you know, lots of people operate in, or hybrid. But yeah, I'm going to say as it is, I think most sales leaders would say, yes, I know what my team are motivated by. If you really pushed on it beyond the headline, I think they'd struggle. Do you think that's fair, or have I got that wrong?
I think that is fair, and I think it actually goes to a bigger and wider issue. The same surface level answer without probing could be so for pipeline. Yeah. You know, sales leaders think they know what's going on in their pipeline, but they don't. They haven't probed deep enough. If a company doesn't pass down the target structure correctly, the quota structure correctly, it's because when the top level has passed it down to the second level hasn't asked an important why question. So when it gets down to the fourth level, they've got no idea. I think, especially in sales, we need to be more inquisitive and ask why and probe further and not take everything at face value because there is a underlying cause. I'm motivated by success. Money is a byproduct of success. I know that I'm motivated by success because if I was in a role where we were not hitting quota and I was feeling miserable for missing quota all the time, and someone offered a pay rise to keep me because I could leave, and get 20% elsewhere, I wouldn't stay to fail. I'd rather leave and earn less money and be successful. So if you don't know what your own individual motivator is and the level of depth that you can give to that answer, how do you expect to be able to question your team? You'll just take the top level answer, which is not just about their motivations. It's the sad reality of discovery, right? You know, being able to go further. We should all learn to be detectives that have to solve murders. I think that would help.
I love that analogy. I've said many a times I love watching, particularly the BBC and ITV have done great detective shows, and I love the interrogation scenes because I feel like they just ask great open-ended questions to get to the truth and to solve the crime. And one of my analogies in the recent book that I wrote with my colleague Rich Smith, Deconstructing Discovery, we have this golden minute And again, I took that from a crime scene that Trevor McDonald was exploring. And they speak about the golden hour, how you have to solve the case or get as much as you can the first hour, because what you solve there really links to the outcome. So yeah, you're totally right. We have got to be detectives. You've got to have that natural ability to keep asking questions, even when you feel like you've asked enough. And I remember there's been times in my career where I feel like I know everybody in the team's personal challenges and frustrations outside of work. And whilst that can be a heavy burden to have, you have to learn the skill to disconnect from it and leave work when you do, etc. But yeah, your job is to help them as human beings, not just salespeople. But I think one of the other mistakes that you see sales leaders make, and I was really guilty of this earlier on in my management career, was let's remember why sales managers are in that role. Most of the time, it's because they were top performers and they've been promoted. Top performers are typically ambitious. They crave success and all that stuff, right? They want it. You can be guilty of assuming everyone is as motivated as you are. They have the same drive, the same motivation. And it was only when I took and we offer these at my sales coach, but I took our sales DNA assessment, and it's incredibly in depth. It's like a 45-page report on who you are as either an individual contributor or a manager of managers. And there was this page on how I motivate the team, and it basically in black and white said, you do not understand how your team are motivated. You assume everyone's motivated like you, and they're not. And that was a big like shit moment. And I made it my mission, therefore, to go and really understand motivations and drivers and, how they like to spend their time outside of work. And I think, but again, it's hard to do that when you manage big teams and you're under pressure and you're remote and you're new to the role and you've got a quota. There's so much going on there. Here's what I'd love to hear from you though, right? What, as a sales leader, can you do to really get through all of that crap? Like, how do you get through all of that on a day-to-day basis? What are the ways in which you can identify the team, understand their motivations, put the plans in place, build for the future, not carry a quote? Like, there's so much there. Help me understand, what is your playbook? You've got a first-time manager in front of you. They don't know what to do on a Monday. How do they bring it to life? How do you bring it to life even?
Caffeine and sarcasm would be the two things. No, it's a great question because there's a lot to do. I think prioritization is key. So if you are just stepping into a new manager, work out the important things that needs to be done now. Get a real grip on your diary. Put in dedicated time that's, it can be rescheduled in the same week for conflicts, but it is dedicated to your team, whether it's a Monday morning catch up, a Friday afternoon before you go off for the weekend. Time together one-to-one. Separate your pipeline reviews from time with the team. So instead of doing an hour on pipeline, do 30 minutes on pipeline and 30 minutes on them. Have they got anything they want to bring to the conversation? Ensure that you're getting the most out of your one-to-ones with your manager, because they are the person that's supposed to help you move forward. These are all things that I'm trying to put down into a playbook and a framework that isn't just in my head, because, you'll know this as well from forming a business. It can be very much a case of, I just do it, right? And that will be the thing that I'm looking forward to most to finishing, is that blueprint of what's the first time manager needs to do in their first, second, third, fourth month. So if they were to receive coaching from me or from anyone else, whether they did it for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, they know what they're able to achieve at the end of that period. And the chances are the things they think they have to do are things they have to do later, not immediately. There'll be more pressing and burning issues to deal with straight off the bat.
Can you give me some examples of things that they often prioritize that can wait?
They want to put their stamp on something, so they're going to change the sales terminology that they use or process. We're going to start using medic, or we're going to get this new bit of tech in. I think a lot of people, when they come in new, try to put their stamp on things. I think that they feel they need to impress, especially if they've been promoted. Did we deserve and earn that promotion, or did we kind of wing it? And then you start to try and do things that we think can impress. The most important thing I think you need to do is understand your current state So what are the team doing now? What are your metrics, the average order value, conversion ratio, velocity, etc.? And get hold of that plan that you spoke about there, where your target must be based on your quota must be based on some assumptions. We're going to get this many leads and convert them for this much value. Reverse engineer your target. Are your current metrics going to get you there? Do you need to improve the metrics? What metrics do you need to improve? Where can you get help improving them?
Let's talk about metrics, because one of the things that I've enjoyed is you've spoken in the past about leaders chasing the wrong metrics, and when they chase the wrong metrics, it encourages the wrong behavior. And you give the example of the hospital being measured on waiting times. Tell us all about that analogy and how that links to the wrong metrics and the wrong behaviors as a result.
Yeah, it's nothing that I've come up with. I've definitely heard it from someone else, probably Rory Sutherland, who's a brilliant marketing genius. So if you said to an A&E department, you need to reduce A&E waiting times, if they focus on the number as opposed to the patient outcome, they will do things which ticks that operational number box, but doesn't actually solve the problem. And what actually does happen in a live example is you have patients in corridors, you have patients still in ambulances that have not been admitted to A&E yet, because if we admit them, the clock starts. So let's keep them outside in the ambulance, then our clock doesn't start. None of those things actually solve the issue. They just deal with the symptoms rather than the root cause. So if you chase the number, I've got to hit 100 dials a day. All you're going to do then is consider success being hit 100 dials. Whereas if you turn around and say, I want to have 20 meaningful conversations, completely different thing. Again, it's a bit metricy. You could have 20 meaningful conversations in 20 dials, or you could have 20 meaningful conversations in 100 dials. You're trying to do something that isn't just that tick box exercise of, look what we did, because 100 dials a day doesn't get you to quota. It might do by fluke, but ultimately you want to book 2 appointments, 3 appointments, make a sale. So look at the root causes of the things you're trying to achieve, the outcomes, not just the symptoms and the metrics.
Sales leaders, I guarantee this, the forecast you're looking at isn't accurate. Why? Because your reps have deals that become stuck in the pipeline. Things like champion leaving, not being taken to power, competitor enters the deal at the last minute, they're ghosting you. Imagine if your reps had access on demand to support, where they could get one-to-one deal coaching with one of our expert coaches. That's what we provide. Your reps can use it proactively. Perhaps they've got a meeting coming up and they want to ensure they're putting their best foot forward. They can book time with a coach and prepare for that upcoming meeting. Or perhaps it's reactively. There's a snag, there's a last minute problem. They need help moving an opportunity forward. They can book same day coaching with one of our expert sales coaches and get help. Deal coaching gives your reps every opportunity to secure the best outcome and keep your forecast as accurate as possible. One of the things that I'd love to get your take on is how does a sales leader draw judgment on the team that perhaps they've inherited, and their true capabilities, their weaknesses, the opportunities to improve? How does a sales leader go about getting that insight without having their biasness affect what they believe to be true? What do you see sales leaders do to get a real grip on where the team are today and where they need to get them to?
I think it's really important because you might have biases, positive and negative. You might think someone is taking the foot off the gas, or that they are really, really good at their job and they're not. I think the way that you would try to understand the real scenario of what's happening, not just your biases, is to get into the data. The data will tell you what their average order value is, the average order value of the team, of the other members. Where do they stack in comparison? Where is the comparison average for the industry? How well are you guys as individuals or team doing? We can be over inundated with data in sales. We've never had more data at our fingertips, but have we had the right data at our fingertips? I believe this since I first saw an OMG sales assessment. I've done one myself as well. It is brutally honest, like you said, can really open up your eyes. And I remember seeing Ben from ONG and Tim Ogo from Toggle Consulting present at a CRO event that I was at. And I just sort of looked at it and I went, this is the data that you need to understand, the 21 different outputs that you can factor into, whether it's the sales DNA, their ability to accept rejection, the negotiating skills, etc., to see whether or not you've got the right people in the right jobs. This was a presentation on, the cost of hiring, the strain of resource and getting it wrong. You could have SDRs that become AEs because they think that is their career path, but they could be the best SDR since sliced bread and make a terrible AE. They could actually be the best CSM person ever. Unless you actually look for the right data to understand your team or your future hires, I think you will just get cluttered by the bias and potentially this noise, unnecessary data.
Yeah. So the assessments you speak about, like just for those listening, that's exactly the same assessment that I spoke about when it highlighted to me that my motivation, I believe everyone's motivated like I am. And it was a big learning point for me that having that data is paramount because it gives you that crystal clear insight into the team and the individuals. And here's what you notice. Everyone's different. Everyone has different strengths, be that tactically, but more importantly, that mindset piece that we spoke about. And if you can't fix the mindset and the behaviors, it doesn't really matter what you help them with tactically because they've got what I would call like handbrakes on that affect their mental, the mental side of sales. Let's give some examples, right? So they might have a poor operating system. So they need to be liked and loved by their prospects. They are uncomfortable talking about money. They let people buy from them how they buy themselves. Let's talk about their natural drive. They might have a high desire to be successful, but a low commitment to actually doing it. They don't actually want to do things that are uncomfortable, even though they'd love to be successful. Perhaps they don't take responsibility for the number that that's been set, and they'll always blame marketing or leads or events or the economy rather than how effective they were. And I think this links really nicely because, if you have that data, doing these assessments, I think it could take you years to get that level of insight, which you can get within an hour of someone completing an assessment. But you've spoken about frameworks and hard data, and you mentioned it earlier on, like one of the things that people should leave until later is a framework, right? You gave the example of, I think you said MedPick. Why do you feel like people prefer the comfort of frameworks versus the discomfort of data?
I think it comes down to we think it's a silver bullet. We think it's the thing that's going to solve our problems. Make $100 a day, have a tech system that's got a million different data points, use AI, implement a new framework, a new sales methodology. This is the reason why my team is not successful. This is going to solve all my problems. I think that's what we fall foul of. You should deploy Medic when you want to understand how you can go from a 30% conversion ratio to a 40% conversion ratio, which areas of the process are maybe lacking. So, is it understanding the economic buyer? Is it understanding the competition? Is it understanding decision criteria, etc.? Who does what at what stages and who does it well and things like that. That's what should be done. But what actually happens more often than not is people go, yeah, let's put Medic or MedPick in, and you just fill your CRM up with nonsense. You don't actually take the learnings. I know, obviously, seeing a few reports that yourselves, my sales coach, and other training providers or SaaS providers in the tech space, in the sales space, have put out there that more often than not, things are more successful when a good discovery is done. Things are more successful when the more people, fill out Medic correctly, not just as a tick box exercise, but as an outcome exercise. If I do these things correctly, I'm going to be successful. The correctly bit is important. If I do these things, I'll be successful. It doesn't work all of the time. It only works some of the time. So I think that's why people jump to that silver bullet, the thing that's going to make their team better. What is missing? It's volume. Let's get a parallel dialer, 200 dials. It's tech. Let's get Lemlist and let's get full enrich. It's AI. Let's send out 1,000 emails that are all personalized. Or it's a new sales methodology and framework. If I just deploy this, it will be fantastic.
I think it's just something to hide behind. You can point to, look, I've done this. I've deployed this technology. I've deployed this framework. It's not me. It's not my fault that it's gone wrong. I think when most companies want to, look, here's the things that sales leaders really care about, right? It's headlines, of course, but improving revenue, improving pipeline, upsell, cross-sell. And when you think about those things, they're like their headline problems, right? we want more revenue. We want revenue from different places. We know we need more pipeline to do that. Where most revenue is lost is in the quality of your sales team's sales conversations, right? Like what they do and what they don't do in those sales conversations. That's where your company leaks revenue. But to go in and fix that requires a manager, one, to spend the time, two, to put themselves out there and say, this is where I think you've gone wrong. And it's their opinion, it's their belief, it's their coaching. And I think that sometimes is hard for a manager to do. There's that imposter syndrome. There's that self-doubt. There's that, I don't want to give this feedback to this individual. I don't want to carve out time. Listening to calls is time consuming. I know, and again, I get slightly worried that people feel like they can hide behind, we'll just automate that now. Like we can build a scorecard in conversation intelligence and that will surface it. But the art of the sales conversation is where most companies leak revenue. And it might not be in that call, but it would be what didn't happen in that call is the reason your deal much further down the line doesn't come in, or it slips, or they ghost you. And I think if you can hide behind, well, the medic scorecard's filled out, or, we've done some training on this, or I've done a disc profile on the team. It's stuff you can hide behind.
It's just tick box exercise, isn't it? It's just tick box.
But what you have to do as a sales leader is immerse yourself in what is the quality of the conversations my sales team are having. And to do that, you have to really put yourself out there, and there's nowhere to hide. I've listened to this call. This is what I think we need to be doing differently, and then putting that into practice. But just because you do it once doesn't mean it changes. It's a constant listening to calls and reinforcement. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of leaders are reluctant to do that because of time, because of will and skill. It is a skill to be able to listen to and coach sales conversations effectively that drive positive change as well, where it's not a skill to implement a framework. It's you get it done and you maybe bring someone in or a consultant and whatnot. So that's my thinking, but what would you say to that?
I'd agree. I definitely think it's something to hide behind. And like you said, then, we could just use a scorecard and get AI to read all of our transcripts from our calls and tell us whether it was good or bad. But if you actually listen to the calls, you might pick up on some nuances that are just completely subjective to that call, that interaction between that client and that AE or that SDR, that you wouldn't pick up just from a scorecard. And if that thing that has come up is actually a much deeper root cause or underlying problem, is something to fix, you'll find it quicker. I think you can leverage AI to identify which calls to listen to, so that because you can't listen to all of them rather than randomly checking them. Can we be a bit more selective? Same way we would do it for ICP. Is there a way which I can filter this data down so that I've got the greater chance of listening to a call that I can actually gain a teachable moment from? It's also a difficult conversation. You've got to tell someone that they're, not doing it right. Is that opinion? Is it fact? Is it subjective? How do they take criticism? How do you deliver criticism? Do you do the sandwich method? Or various other ways? Do you as a leader take time to go, I'm not being coached on how to do this. Let me go and research how to do it. You spoke earlier in this interview where you said you're constantly saying as an SDR to your AE, can I take this off your plate? Not everyone thinks of that instant, what I can do next. Some people are waiting to be told. As a sales leader, you need to very quickly realize you need to work out what you need and where you can get it, what your team needs and where they can get it.
And I think that's a lovely way to bring the conversation to a close. I've really enjoyed getting to speak to you today, John. We've spoke about how people fall into leadership roles. They might chase it because they're a top performer and it feels like the next step. How companies back it because they feel like they're a company that's showing progression and they don't want to lose their top performer. We spoke about the challenges that can bring, where they don't want to lose the revenue, so they give them the quota as well. And when I spoke about how leadership is just a completely different job, like different skills, different pressures, different emotional load, and you need people to help you make that shift. You need support from the organization. We need support from internal and external coaching, and And we need to not just focus on the month and the quarter, but look ahead and really put our team forward, team first, I should say. And I love the parent analogy. And I think to anyone that's got kids, myself included, I think that really does bring it to life. But yeah, John, I just want to say, thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise today. I think this is a great episode for anybody that is thinking about making the step into a leadership role, or they've just got their first leadership role and they're thinking, shit, what do I do on a Monday? Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Thank you.